It is a great honor and pleasure to introduce one of our key people and a leader in a key organization in our U.S. military. It was great that Jim McGuire offered to help facilitate getting Matt out here, because I know that this audience in particular is particularly interested in understanding how warfare has changed, particularly post 9/11. So with that, to have somebody who has served multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, who is the commander of the Naval Special Warfare Group 1 out of Coronado, California, come and talk to us from his perspective about what new roles are for the Special Forces for new conflicts that we face right now. So with that, I welcome Matt Rosenbloom. Captain Matt Rosenbloom, please. We are thrilled to have you.
Thanks. All right, how's this mic? Everybody hear me okay in the back? The farthest reaches? Okay, good. All right, hey, thank you, Maureen, very much for the introduction. So, again, I'm Captain Matthew Rosenbloom. I'm the commander, Naval Special Warfare Group 1. In simpler terms, I'm in charge of all West Coast SEAL teams. And so, and I have a counterpart that's on the East Coast who's responsible for all East Coast-based SEAL teams. And so, what I'm going to do here, real quick, I'm going to play kind of a quick video to get everybody all excited. And don't worry, it's only a couple of minutes. And then after that, I will go ahead and kind of start the presentation. So, and with the video, you'll see that you're in good hands with Naval Special Warfare, and you'll understand that joke in a second. Okay, go ahead and play it.
Reflecting the legacy of those who came before them: combat swimmers, demolition experts, patrol boat commandos, and intelligence operators. Small teams tasked with conducting reconnaissance, gathering intelligence, executing direct action missions, and clearing the beaches for Allied landings in places like Normandy, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and Wonsan. The first SEAL teams, established in 1962, perfected unconventional warfare skills operating in the Mekong Delta and the jungles of Vietnam. In 1987, Congress established the U.S. Special Operations Command with its Navy, Air Force, and Marine components. With the ability to manage its own resources, the U.S. Special Operations Command transformed SMART, and with it, Naval Special Warfare. The mission of Naval Special Warfare Command is to man, train, equip, deploy, and sustain maritime special operations forces for operations and activities worldwide in support of geographic combatant commanders and U.S. national interests. SEALs conduct missions within sea, air, and land domains. While experts in the maritime environment, they are equally capable of planning and executing direct action missions in urban, desert, and mountainous terrain. Their actions are typically swift and decisive, striking with surprise, speed, and appropriate use of force. Special warfare combatant craft crewmen, known as SWIC, conduct coastal patrols, special reconnaissance, combat gunfire support, and SEAL search and extraction. SEALs and SWIC undergo one of the toughest and most comprehensive military training in the world. It begins at our schoolhouse, the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, California. The rigorous selection, training, and qualification process for SEALs, it has to be. It must produce mature, highly skilled, culturally attuned warriors who can be trusted to accomplish some of our nation's most sensitive, no-fail missions. Critical to Naval Special Warfare's operation is a cadre of mission specialists devoted to explosive ordnance disposal, intelligence, communications, training, logistics, maintenance, medicine, and a host of other combat support services. Today, SEALs are networked with U.S. joint forces, other government agencies, and key allied partners. Operations are planned and supported by up-to-the-minute intelligence. These connections facilitate access and a global presence 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. With these efforts and other U.S. SALT, Naval Special Warfare is fostering a network of partners to help advance global stability. The dedication and unconditional support of resilient NSW families is key to the success of our forces. After more than a decade of wartime deployments, preserving our force and families is more important than ever before. The demand signal for Special Operations Forces is and will remain very high. The Naval Special Warfare Team will continue to identify the right people to manage ranks, prepare our forces for future engagements, and remain relevant, poised to engage where needed, when as required, and ensure our Navy's and nation's defense needs are met.
Okay, so if anybody wants to enlist now, I'm signing age waivers. If you, it's never too late.
Since you're wondering,
what's that?
I'm gonna get rid of
Just move this?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're strong. Can you move that back there?
Sure.
Exactly.
All right. Essentially, this is what I'm going to talk about today. In one hand, how we went from a naked swimmer, and that's just something that we as a community were referenced during World War II, due to the fact that guys were literally doing things in swim trunks. That's a guy putting a demolition haversack on an obstacle to clear beaches in the Pacific. So very well known as naked warriors. But then how we transition then to hyper-enabled operators. And this is, as we, as I'll kind of discuss, is how we've embraced technology, how conflict has made us change and adapt from, guys wearing literally swim trunks, swim fins, and demolition to, a Halo battle suit over there in the main photo. Go ahead and, used to say next slide. Okay, so a couple of disclaimers. Number one is I talk fast. So if I am talking too fast, please feel free to, wave signal or slow down. Give me a slow down signal. Two, I am in the Navy, so we love acronyms, and it's literally a part of our language. So if I'm going to try not to do that to you, but if I do slip and I say something like, hey, when I was the CO of Jasodif AP working for NAVCENT, we would do MEOs on VOIs using a half bath. Okay, that is a perfectly understandable statement for me. Okay, and if I was talking to my people, they know exactly what I was talking about. Okay, you probably didn't, and so I will try to avoid acronyms. But if I do use some, feel free to again, like, hey, what does that mean if it's relevant? And then lastly. As which you probably all know, which is this is an unclassified environment, so there is certain levels of detail or on certain topics that we can only kind of discuss to a certain level. So with that, some of this was discussed there by in the video, but I will kind of cover it. What is NSW? So one thing is important to understand. And I don't want to insult anybody's intelligence, but it's very common for people to reference, my community as Navy SEALs. My community is Naval Special Warfare, and I'm gonna kind of talk why that is an important designation. Navy SEALs are one part of that community. That community is about 10,000 folks total. That's between SEALs, SWICs, which they covered in the video. Those are our special boat drivers. Combat enablers, okay? Combat enabler means your intel analyst, your communication specialist, logistics, administration, same things that make everything run. And a robust civilian workforce. Only about 3,000 of those are actual SEALs. So again, so our community incorporates all aspects of Naval Special Warfare. Also, one thing is, kind of the topic always comes up when people go, hey, wait a minute, Navy SEAL, frogman, combat diver, why is this guy out in the mountains of Afghanistan? Why is this guy rumbling around on the streets of Baghdad, Iraq? Because we operate in all domains. Some people kind of use that concept as the fungible operator, which basically says, hey, you're qualified to kind of operate anything. And although we are specialists in the maritime domain, we actually operate wherever the nation needs us. In fact, that's not a typo on the capital E. If you were ever curious as to why we are actually called SEALs, we are not named after the animal. It's actually a brilliant Navy acronym of sea, air, and land. And so, anyway, so I'm not going to balance a ball on my nose. I'm not going to. They tried to come up with an acronym for the word walrus, and it didn't work. So I said, oh, that makes sense. We can use that. So maritime component of U.S. Special Operations Command. Special Operations Command down in Tampa, Florida, they are actually our boss. We work in a joint community, and although we are in the Navy, right? It says right there on my name tape, and administratively, I work for the Navy. Navy pays my salary. We, for the most part, are completely and wholly under Special Operations Command from a authorities and operational control perspective. And then just really quick, kind of going over what SEALs kind of look like. As you can see here, you know, we are a little bit older than a regular entry level sailor. Our guys, even on the enlisted ranks, pretty good. About a third of them have bachelor's degrees when they enlisted in the Navy, and that's probably a little bit low. You know, when I kind of like welcome aboard all the guys that are coming to my group, you know, we always say, hey, show of hands, how many people in here have college degrees? It's actually about 75%. And I'll discuss how we select and assess guys and why we're able to get those folks. Okay, that's who we are. Where we came from. This was also touched on a little bit of, you know, kind of in the video. We were created in World War II out of necessity. That was the need for amphibious reconnaissance and beach clearance. You know, the Marine Corps learned a lot of hard lessons invading Pacific Islands during the island hopping campaign, and so in the Pacific, it became very much about clearance of obstacles, blowing reeds, so that you could actually conduct an amphibious invasion. Same type of thing happened over in the European theater. This is actually that's actually one of the very few photos of the first wave at Normandy at Omaha Beach. And the reason you know who this guy is, you can't see on the picture, but that's a little upside down U on his helmet that denotes that he was underwater demolition. They cleared 70% of the obstacles on Omaha Beach at the very start. They also incurred about 70% casualties. But that's our background, is in World War II. Big transformational event for us was Vietnam. So we had a primarily amphibious reconnaissance force. Okay, SEAL teams were created by President Kennedy in 1962, designed to be counterinsurgency, counter-guerrilla, and a direct action force. And each of the services formally stood up their elements. So we created SEAL teams out of underwater demolition teams and naval combat demolition units. That was SEAL Team 1 and 2. And they spent a lot of time in Vietnam. And this is where a lot of our unconventional thinking came from. A lot of our community culture, which I will kind of touch on a little bit. We kind of pride ourselves as being creative problem solvers. And especially by reducing the limitations that are sometimes imposed upon you. We also have a very one of our famous sayings guys learned from the very first day in BUDS, which I'll cover BUDS here in a second, is if you're not cheating, you're not trying. So we were heavily formed by the Vietnam War. When I first checked into as a brand new guy at a SEAL team, In 1992, I had Vietnam vets were my mentors. Master chiefs, senior chiefs who were still at the team, and they knew more about combat and jungle warfare than they've forgotten more about it than I think I'll ever learn. Okay, obviously next seminal event was 9/11. Post 9/11, we started to rapidly deploy and immediately started adapting to what was required, and that created a very large transformational event for us. As we really got out of, I won't say we got out of it, but we became heavily focused on more ground type operations, whether that was the mountains of Afghanistan, that was the streets of Baghdad. Our primary mission focus became counterterrorism, and then we started to incorporate heavily new equipment, tactics, and technology. War has a funny way of accelerating progress, it drives a distinct need to improve, to get better, to figure out a better way. And so from 9/11 till today, we're still in that kind of mode of rapid transformation. Okay, so how do we do it? How do we start from scratch and create a SEAL? Recruit, select, assess, and develop the right people. We're pretty fortunate. We have no shortage of people trying to apply for our program. And when you have that, you can be very selective. And so what that has done is again, raise those standards of what we let in as a entry-level person to even start training. And so typically, again, you have a guy with multiple years, if not a degree in college, probably played some type of sport, in high school or college. And of course, it's exactly what you would think. We get hockey and rugby players from the Northeast. We get wrestlers from the Midwest. We get, swimmers from, California and Florida, and, and football players throughout. So, ironically, we don't have basketball players. Like, we're not big on basketball. Trust me, we've done these demographics to figure out, like, how's the perfect candidate going to look like. For some reason, basketball players is not, which is hilarious because obviously my wife was a basketball player. But so that is just who we offer a contract to start training. Okay, and at that point you start a pipeline, which starts with basic underwater demolition SEAL. It's always called BUDS. And in BUDS is 7 months long, and the pure focus is really to develop mental and physical toughness and teach guys about teamwork. It is our assessment program. It is not necessarily a training program, although there's lots of training that goes on. But it's really we are assessing that candidate pool to who can meet the standards. Hell Week gets a lot of attention, but because it is 5, depending on the phase, but 5 to 6 days of no sleep, uninterrupted training, day, night, and lots of cold water and sand. And so there's a lot of attrition that happens there, but really the whole program is 7 months, and that's probably the most over time what affects. So typically we have about an 80% attrition rate during that training. So, and that's to graduate from BUDS. After that, we now say you've been molded into something that is trainable, and you're ready to now start training and actually become qualified as a SEAL. But you got to do a whole nother course for that. That's SEAL qualification training. This is now when guys start using real equipment, real tactics, real techniques, and we go to an advanced level. We typically don't see a lot of attrition at that point, although we still do. That's 6 more months. At the end of that guy becomes now a qualified SEAL. So again, now from our standpoint, congratulations. You get your warfare designator. You are a qualified SEAL, and now you're eligible to be trained in a platoon. So you get assigned to a SEAL team and you go into a platoon. That platoon does an 18-month workup. And then that guy then that guy is ready to be deployed with his unit, in this case, a platoon. So overall, it takes about 2.5 years to get a fully trained and qualified individual SEAL. And then once he is in that cycle, that is the cycles that people will live in. That's their life now. It's platoon, troop, SEAL team, and you are in what we call the interdeployment training cycle, which basically means you train, you deploy. Then you come back, and you train again, and then you deploy. Because we are in the Navy, we are regularly scheduled deployers. We don't necessarily need a purpose because we're in the Navy. That's what the Navy does, right? The ship has to get underway. Well, the SEAL team has to go forward. So, all right, that's kind of our basic training pipeline. Okay, so what does all this mean? Okay, so post 9/11, I kind of touched on a pretty seminal event for us. So in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, we sent guys to Afghanistan. And our purpose as Naval Special Warfare, our primary role is direct action. Within the Special Operations community, there are various branches. Okay, they talked about it. Every service has a branch in Special Operations. Army, Marine Corps, Air Force, they all have their own Special Operations. We all have our own specialties within that. And ours is direct action. Ours is raids. Ours is assaults. Ours is direct targeting of the enemy. And so that's what we did initially in Afghanistan. And then as Iraq kicked off, we shifted right over and did the same thing there. Kind of a quick summary of Iraq, which Iraq was really a defining kind of theater for us. Kind of defining theater for me. I mean, I've done 8 tours in Iraq. But we started off on night 1 interdicting the oil rigs that are sitting off right before the actual invasion to ensure that they couldn't kind of do what they had done in the first Gulf War, which is open the spigots and pour oil into the Gulf. And then pretty much rolled in the Marine Corps zone up into Baghdad, and at that point we immediately went into targeting insurgents. Which would remain one of our bread and butters in Iraq for the entire time we were here, which is manhunt in the F3EA cycle. Again, it's an acronym. It was too long for me to write out. Find, fix, finish, exploit, analyze. Okay, this is something we learned. Okay, in the good old days, it was find a bad guy, go capture or kill the bad guy. Move on to next bad guy, right? And rapidly, and this will kind of tie into as I talk about what we're going to do in the future. Everything is network centric. Okay, I mean, we can capture and kill onesies for the next 5,000 straight years. Okay, however, to actually do that, they are part of a network. Insurgencies, terrorists, it doesn't matter what it is. They are part of networks, and they are tied in. Suddenly, hey, we defined it as F3EA, and an F3EA is still what is in use today. Okay, finding them just means you got to know that a guy exists. Okay, and maybe you got to put a name to it. You may not have a name to it, but you know he exists. Fixing him is finding out where he is. And that's the actual locating him. Okay, and once you've located him, you finish him. That's the go get him phase. And once you go get him, now you're in exploit. It means what kind of intel value do I get off of that target? What does that guy know that can lead me to my next target? Hey, what's on the computer that can help me paint and find more guys so that I can start this cycle over again? Okay? And so I'm not tooting Naval Special Warfare's horn here, but we perfected this cycle. And we put it into hyperdrive, where you are finding, fixing at such a cyclic rate. It just generated a very high op tempo. Another thing we did was conventional support. A lot of people don't advertise that whole lot because we tend to do standalone special operations. But in Iraq, we did a heavily conventional support because conventional forces own the ground. That's just the way the Army, the military does things, right? We carve up space and we say, this unit owns that area, right? So they're heavily involved, and so we would work with them. In fact, probably some of the most, in fact, can this thing go back?
Yeah, I can make it go back.
One more. There we go. So you might wonder why Navy SEAL is wearing Army camouflage. By the way, that's Mike Mansour. He won the medal in Ramadi, jumping on a grenade in 2006. Because they worked with the Army. The guys who they worked with in their space was the 101st Airborne, which is pretty awesome because my grandfather was the 101st. But they were with the 101st, and so they adapted to working with them in their AO. And then kinetic targeting. That has become turned into a sort of an operational form all by itself, in the sense of the authorities, the approvals, the level of detail, what we call PID, P-I-D, positive identification. That is, you have to know what you're seeing and what you are targeting. And that can come and go at various levels of detail. And that is the nature of warfare. And I'm going to kind of talk to that a little bit about the amount of technological detail that is available out there to us. Also sometimes necessitates then a requirement for that level of detail. So while our forefathers in Vietnam might have said, hey, I'm getting shot at from that village, I'm going to drop a bunch of bombs on the village. Done. Like, that's okay. That makes sense. Okay, we really can't do that today. What we do is we have a multitude of intelligence collection methods so that we can absolutely, within a certain level of certainty, say that a specific individual is in a specific place doing a specific something, and oh, by the way, he's not there with his wife and kids or the neighborhood, whatever, and that there's no likelihood or limited likelihood that we will have collateral damage. And that is a process. It requires heavily on technology and intel collection. So, and that's, again, this is something that it just takes refining. So when Iraq wanted me back in 2014, when ISIS kind of rolled through Mosul, I kind of led everything that was back in Iraq. That's all we did. All we did was kinetic targeting, and probably to the tune of about 5,000 strikes during my 6 months there. So it becomes very, very viable. Okay, but Iraq and Afghanistan was not the only things we were doing. Philippines, and you're going to start seeing this theme here: building partner capacity at A3E. A3E: advise, assist, accompany, and then E, enable. That is working with partner forces. Intel sharing. Horn of Africa, same thing. Partner forces, A3E. Arabian Peninsula, this is pretty much the whole Gulf Cooperation Council areas of Saudi Arabia, Oman, UAE, Bahrain, Qatar. Again, building partner capacity, maritime interdiction. Why? That's the Persian Gulf, which we don't call the Persian Gulf, we call it the Arabian Gulf, because the Arabs like to call it the Arabian Gulf. So, and then countering malign state actors. There are some bad actors in that neighborhood, and it behooves us to actually work by, with, and through our partners where we have shared interests. And then South and Central America, same thing, building partner capacity, but at the same time they focus on counter-narco-terrorism because there is a nexus. And if I'm not going to talk in detail to this about but even as we go into the future, and I talked about networks, okay, the world is one big global network, okay, and believe it or not, bad guys talk to bad guys. It doesn't matter what they or why they are bad, but they have definite connections have connective ties, and they facilitate things, even though it makes no sense whatsoever. You know, why a guy who steals cars in New York is directly financing Hezbollah buying rockets to fire into Israel. How does that work? I'm not going to exactly tell you how that works, but it does. Because of the convoluted nature of how these different enterprises talk to each other and facilitate each other. Sometimes they don't even know what they're facilitating on another end, you know. And you see some very weird partnerships that happen out there in the world. Okay, next, I don't even have this. All right, so what does the future look like? Well, it looks a hyper version of what we have today. You know, for us, the threat, twofold. Number one, terrorism, okay? And in the military, we actually call it countering, because we like to put big names on everything, is countering violent extremist organizations, okay? Then we're saying terrorists. You could say bad guys. But it's a little bit oversimplified. So that is one of our major lines of effort. It's the one that we in Naval Special Warfare are most heavily involved in. And violent extremist organizations, this is everything from, you know, what we are currently, which is people, Al-Qaeda, which is still around, ISIS, they're definitely still around, and all their little offshoots, okay? Because again, going back to that networked organizations, there are a lot of different organizations out there that are kind of like franchises. It really is. I mean, I was kind of semi-joking there, but it's really not. You know, so you know how. In Reno, do you guys call it Carl's Jr. or Hardee's? Okay, Carl's Jr. Okay, I'm a Carl's Jr. guy, right? But if you go to the East Coast, what is it? It's Hardee's. Okay, still get a famous star there, right? Okay, right? It's the same restaurant, but if my authorities, the way you all understand it to be, the way politicians write policy, is that I can only target Carl's Jr., guess who gets a free pass? Hardee's does. Because they're not Carl's Jr., right? So this is, again, going back to that net-centric thing. We have seen lots of different groups out there, and they are some of the most wazoo-named groups. They look like very local bad people that are throughout the world, but they align themselves. They align themselves through ideology. They align themselves through recruiting, through messaging, and that is a challenge to basically inform the American people, sometimes inform policymakers that, hey, that group called the Global Salafists for Preaching and Combat, that's called Al-Qaeda. That's what it's. You know, Hardee's, they serve famous stars. They're Carl's Jr., right? But it becomes a challenge because now you start getting into how proactive you can be in a network-centric approach because these groups are everywhere. And I'm not paranoid. I'm not a conspiracy freak, and I don't see, wear my foil hat, okay? But I do read a lot of intel, and I've been around a bit, okay? It's everywhere and it's connected. So the question is, how much do you target it? That's going to be one of our biggest challenges going forward. 5 minutes? Okay, 5 more minutes. This is the last slide. And I will tell you, you want to talk about something that people did us a favor? So the group I just mentioned, I didn't make that up. The Global Salafists for Preaching and Combat. You're thinking like, oh, that sounds like the local gang members in Mauritania. Like, kind of, but really they're Al-Qaeda guys. You know what they did for us? They did the best thing ever. Hardee's changed his name to Carl's Jr. Because they weren't getting any love within their own organization. And they said, nobody knows who the GSPC is. We have no respect. Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. That's a cooler name. And we all went, finally, because now I can explain to people that you're really Al-Qaeda because you changed your name. Silly as that sounds, right? But that's how. Okay, second part, hybrid warfare short of conflict, peer, near peer. I'm not going to go into details on our peer, near peer competitors because it's outlined in the National Defense Strategy, but I'm pretty sure you guys know who our peer, near peer competitors are. And we are in a constant state of, I call it hybrid warfare, because essentially nobody wants a major conflict. So what ends up happening is there's very smaller conflicts, and there's influence that go around the world as we kind of jockey for position. How are we going to compete with that? How do we compete with both that globally dispersed technology? That's one thing I didn't cover. I will real quick. Here's the other thing about that fanatical religious who lives in a cave and wants to put explosives on him and blow himself up. Yeah, that guy knows how to use the internet really well. Really well. And if he doesn't, he's got a buddy who does. And that is enabling this global information, global coordination, global financing from all of these groups. It's what brings together a small group in North Africa to another group in the Horn of Africa to another group in Southeast Asia. And one's recruiting and getting money from another to get people to send them over to a conflict zone over here, and when they're done, plan to do something over here. Okay? And that is sort of the scenarios we see. Money from one country to go to financing to move people who are let's say in the Philippines, who are getting ideology spun at them to be recruited to go fight in Syria for ISIS. And then ISIS will turn them around and eventually start planning external operations in Europe. Okay? That's what I mean by globally dispersed and yet enabled through technology. How do we beat them? Joint interagency and coalition. This is a challenge. The military, the U.S. government, we are large organizations. Our intelligence communities are very large organizations. There can sometimes be bureaucracy. There are different stovepipes. There are, we like to call them pillars of excellence, stovepipes of excellence. But we have to break it down. Combined with coalition, okay, our partners around the world are critical to everything we do. Okay, we cannot hope to replicate, for instance, what the Australians do and know about in Southeast Asia. You can't. We just got to be really good friends with the Australians. We have to have intel sharing agreements with the Australians. Okay, when I rolled back in 2014, I had an Australian task force with me, and they were like, "Hey, we're here to kill ISIS, boss, and we work for you." So it was actually really cool because our prime minister came out later, and he actually said the exact same thing. So again, in a trans-regional approach, and that means that we carve up the world in pieces, right? And then we have to coordinate around those pieces. Well, the problem is like, ISIS does not have to get approval to talk to somebody over in Southeast Asia. He just sends them an email on the internet, right? Okay, us in the military, we like to, hey, that's my space to coordinate with, and you have to do this, that, and the other. So we have to break down those seams. And then the final government, and that's, if I could leave one takeaway, that is, my first takeaway is like, you guys should think Navy SEALs are cool. But if you could have another takeaway, it would be that we are a very small part of the solution. Okay, I trust me. Since 9/11, and which means 17 straight years of this, doing what my community does, which is heavily kinetic operations. Okay, I am under no illusion that we are going to kill our way to victory, and no one should be either. We're just not gonna. Hey, we'll just kill them all. That's not going to happen. Okay, we talk in terms of the dime. diplomacy, intelligence, military, economic, right? Yeah, DIME. So if you guys ever hear DIME on TV, that's what they're talking about, okay? By the way, the M is small m, okay? Big E, big D, diplomatic and economic, okay? And if we're not syncing all of that together, then we're going to be doing this for a while. And for us, again, what we are doing is taking everything I've done now, all of our core skill sets, offensive-minded. We have to be lethal, flexible, agile to adapt to those challenges. And I know I've totally gone over, and I'm ready for questions.
Thank you, Matt. That was an absolutely fabulous presentation. And obviously, I have a stack of questions, so we're going to get right to it. And because I'm chair, I get the prerogative of organizing the questions. So I get to pick the question I wanted to ask first, which is, you kept saying he and him. Would you care to explain how many women
Thanks.
are in the SEALs and what their role is and
Hey,
how they're selected and how they're trained? Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to... Can we do the next slide? Sorry. There's one last one, because this is what I'd rather be doing than answer that question. No, that's actually an easy question, because I get it a lot. There are no female SEALs. The SEAL community and BUDS training is wide open to females. That was, changed by SecDef Carter. It applied to us. And for us, we actually take a very simple view of this. Take aside opinions and everything else, because we are a standards-based organization. I told you earlier, 80% action. Okay, we take guys who are Olympic medal-bearing athletes, and we kick them out of training because they don't do something fast enough, we don't like their character, or they can't do enough pull-ups, or whatever. Okay, we take guys who are All-Americans at whatever, and we drive them out because they do not meet standards. We are zealots when it comes to standards. The standard is the standard. Hey, you know what? Hey, if I can be fully kitted up, which with me means about, all total, you're probably carrying about 295, 300 pounds. You can throw me over your shoulder. You can run over uneven ground in Nyland at 120 degrees in the middle of summer in a live fire contact. I don't care if you are male, female. I don't care if you are blue, purple, black, white, yellow. You just better be able to do that. Okay? So if you meet the standard, and BUDS has a very good way of finding a secret sauce, we call it. And there's no way to find it out before. So if a female, we've had a couple of females come through an initial assessment for a couple of different reasons. They were not selected, but we are wide open, and our position is, here's our standards. You meet the standards. Done.
Great. Thank you. They will rise to the challenge, I assure you, someday. So you gave us a fabulous discussion about our approach to special ops. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we have questions here about are we facing the same thing on the other side? In particular, China, Russia, Iran, all the countries that are our traditional adversaries, mm-hmm. do they have your equivalent?
Oh, yeah.
And if so, how good are they?
So, not very good. And a lot of that is, I would tell you, the best equivalent in special operations from a U.S. standpoint is our Five Eye partners. The Canadians, the Australians, the Kiwis, and the Brits. And very close behind them is the Western Europeans. And that is not a, Western European optical world. Their history and their training, and now in the last 15 years, their experience has made them that. A lot of these countries, they have some very highly trained units, but they're not very combat tested, which is where you really learn lessons. And two, they tend to sometimes be what we call badge commandos, meaning they're really in it to get the badge, right? You have special forces so that you can have a bunch of guys that have badges that say special forces. And so it's like, I'm not impressed with the Spetsnaz guy on the trampoline jumping through a ring of fire, throwing a tomahawk at a target. I could utterly care less, right? I mean, that tells you nothing. So I don't know if that was a somewhat semi-opinionated nature of saying it.
You're allowed.
But, when we first went into Iraq, Iraq had the 4th largest army in the world, right? 4th largest army in the world. They were armed with modern T-72 Russian main battle tanks, okay? They were combat experienced. They'd spent 8 years fighting against Iran, okay? People were like sitting there going like, oh my God, we're literally invading this country, okay? We took on that entire nation with essentially 4 divisions total, and took over the whole country and lost about 110 guys. And although we have come to think of this as normal, okay, that is like the biggest military rout in history. And that's not arrogance speaking, but sometimes you got to realize the enemy is not 10 feet tall. We paint him out to be, and I like I said, there's a little bit of opinion in my own capabilities of my organization, but I'm not afraid of them.
Excellent, excellent. So from an operational perspective, you really talked about the networks much more so than the adversary. And of course, we all know the old expression, the head of the snake. But what you described is really not a snake, but an octopus or a
starfish.
Or a starfish, or lots of starfish. So when you think about what you're doing now and into the future...
I'm like pacing behind you, sorry.
Behind me.
Stand up.
Is there a head of the octopus that you go after, or a head of the starfish that or is that just an illusion?
There's actually a paper on this. You probably read it. Okay, and it's literally called The Spider and the Starfish.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, a book.
We also read, by the way. I don't just I'm not just hard and strong and lift heavy things. We read. And so for a while there, at the beginning, we were very much into that decapitation, right? And that means decapitate leadership, not act.
Yeah.
Leah. But it was based on going after the leaders, go after the leadership, right? Oh, if you cut off the head of the snake, right? The snake dies. Okay, I tell you, the snake doesn't die because it's not a snake; it's a starfish. Okay. And so really it's like that is why we look at these things through network targeting. In fact, sometimes taking out leadership is actually not a good thing. You know why? Because the next guy up is better. I mean, these are realities. I mean, trust me. I've done a lot of these high value target raids and strikes, and you watch the next guy come up, and like I said, you can do that forever. UBL's dead, AQ's still around.
Yep.
Okay? We can go kill Baghdadi. ISIS is still around. So again, it's a network-centric targeting and ideology approach. That answer that question?
It does. It does. And
I will Google Spider and Starfish.
I'll put the reference up. It is a great book if you haven't read it. So, okay. So let's look at some other areas where you were not operating. Obviously, you know a lot about Iraq, so we're not going to ask you about Iraq. We wouldn't do that. We're going to ask you about other places like Africa and Central America. So when we look at them from your perspective, from the special ops perspective, are we looking at coherent groups of adversaries? Are we looking at gangs like MS-13? What are we really concerned about in places that we don't hear about on the news all the time? So take Central South America and Africa. There you go. So
what the question you were asking is the same question that we struggle with. You know, because like I said, in Africa, let's say, there are a lot of issues in Africa. Okay, take away terrorism. Okay, that place has a lot of issues, and there are lots of reasons for them to be at war with each other. And there's a lot of shifting allegiances, and there's shifting ideology. And in the middle of it, you've injected terrorism. So that goes back to sort of how I said how it was nice that the Hardys changed their name to Carl's Jr. Because it provides some clarity. Because, you know, it is difficult to kind of get your hands around Al-Shabaab. Right? Has anybody heard of Al-Shabaab? Okay, Somalia. Okay. Okay, so Al-Shabaab is really an offshoot of what used to be Al-Qaeda in East Africa, which was really kind of, you know, a merger of really a clan warfare of the one clan that was a little bit more extremist than its needs, figured out, hey, sign up to this whole Al-Qaeda thing, I get more wasta, I'll get more guns, I'll get more influence, so I can crush my clan buddies across the way in Mogadishu. And then they start to get radicalized a little bit more. Now it becomes, are they really Al-Qaeda to attack us externally, or is it really just still clan warfare? And it's a struggle. I hope you're not thinking I'm just going to give you the perfect answer, but that is everywhere. When you get into some of these countries, a lot of countries in the world that have these loose shifting allegiances, constantly varying degrees of inner conflict and motivations. Sometimes people become Al-Qaeda for convenience. I mean, that sounds like, some of this is like stuff that you really have to shift your kind of cultural thinking that, you know, I mean, people will do things out of just convenience. Hey, I'll be an Al-Qaeda guy for a couple of years. We'll kind of get back on our feet, and then we'll cut them loose, right? And oh, by the way, the Al-Qaeda guys, ISIS guys, they fight each other. Okay, we like to help that along. But because there is these shifting agendas and loyalties. So ISIS has a branch in Afghanistan. I don't know if people know that. Most people think ISIS is Syria and Iraq. They have a pretty big branch in Afghanistan. And they are very ISIS kind of guys. And, well, the Taliban is kind of like, those guys are crazy. Like they're really like crazy. And oh, by the way, there's a lot of foreigners in that group. Okay, Taliban are all local, right? But, you know, they're Afghans. And guess what? They fight each other all the time. You know, so which of those is terrorism? Because we're fighting them both. So they're fighting each other, and then we're kind of like, well, maybe we kind of want to help those guys because they're less worse than the other guys. And that is our challenge across the globe, because that's all over Africa. It's all over South America. It's in varying parts of much smaller amounts in Southeast Asia, but in the Middle East of shifting alliances. So, kind of a non-answer. Yes? No,
that was good. It's murky. It's complicated.
Yes.
So you talked a lot about looking at the future of technologies. Of course, we always admire your team and your teammates for your brains and your brawn. Now, give us some insight technologically. Two sides to the technology, okay? First is, how involved are you in your operations with things like the advancing of social, you know, the use of social media and all that, all the way up to artificial intelligence? That's one side. Then go to the other side, and how do you deal with groups that try and operate off the grid and stay away from you entirely with no signature?
So that that really boils down to your what we call the ints. Anybody who's involved in Intel knows what the ints are, right? Human, SIGINT, common, ELINT, MASINT. You know, they're all intelligence. Right? They're just varying mediums of which you're collecting intelligence. This is where we go back to how we're enabled with technology and why we have to have those combat enablers, where we have Intel analysts that are specific to us. And we also do have cells that can exploit social media. However, that is a very murky, tricky legal environment. Because there's one thing when it's Abu Bad Guy who's got a Facebook page, okay? But what happens when Abu Bad Guy is talking to John Smith in the United States? Okay, I'm the U.S. military. Okay, I can't start intel collecting on citizens in the United States, right? So now you have this again. That networked world becomes very weird because now who are you talking to? Who are you seeing? And so the specific question was, how are we leveraging that?
Well, how are you dealing with both the high capabilities, technological capabilities, or those who shun technology altogether?
Okay. So the ones that shun technology altogether, the classic living in a cave somewhere, that is when you realize, hey, I'm not going to get a lead on this guy through signals intelligence. I'm not going to get it through all my other maybe traditional means. But what I am going to use is now I'm going to pour effort into my human intelligence. And we have people who are qualified, basically case officers, who can run sources, to get you a start point. You got to start somewhere. And again, you got to find, right? Got to find them. And then you got to fix them. So now you can use imagery analysis. This is where you get into your drones or looking at likely points, or you're following a vehicle. And this is where I get into that man-hunting. I have sat and stared at 2 to 3 weeks to develop a pattern of life on somebody, because I watch them in their truck and they drive over here, and then they get in another truck, and then they go visit this house, and we know whose bad house that is. And he gets in, and and you develop it so that it's actionable. But if you don't have that, you got old school. And this is where partner forces come in as well. Because I can tell you right now, like in Iraq, we have guys out in the western Anbar Desert, ISIS guys, who are coming back from Syria right now big time, coming back to Iraq. Okay? And they're going out into the western desert, which is wasteland. I would make a Nevada joke, but I'm not gonna, because my wife would kill me.
And the Chisholm clan.
but the western Anbar looks a lot like northeast Nevada. Is that okay to say? I've driven through there once. But there's nothing out there, right? I mean, there's just nothing out there. I mean, you can dig a hole out there and hide in it, and no one's going to find you for a long time, right? Well, that's the Anbar in western Iraq, and that's where these guys are coming back to. So, we can take our Iraqi partners and say, hey, why don't you guys just sweep through that area and see what happens? That might jostle something. So you get creative in how you kind of tackle those things.
Excellent. I'm going to give you one last question that tied to probably the first word you used here, which was recruit.
Recruit.
So I'm going to roll a few things in here together. You said there were 3,000 Navy SEALs out of the Naval Special Operations Group. That's one question is that enough? The second question is, are you able to recruit? Obviously, there must be a lot of interest here because I got a lot of questions about recruiting. Are you able to recruit, say, millennials? Are there any millennials here? No. So the question is, looking forward, what does naval special warfare really look like? Do you have enough SEALs? Are you recruiting the next generation of people that are willing to do this? And are they bringing a new insight into warfare? Will the SEALs adjust? Will naval special warfare adjust with your recruiting? And what do you see looking forward?
Okay, recruiting. We recruit just like anybody else. You know, for goodness or badness, you know, we're very popular, and so people know a lot of information. And hey, I want to do that. So we don't have a problem attracting people, and because we have a lot of people coming, we can be selective on who we actually allow into the program. Because our program can only BUDS can only handle so many students, right? So we can only let in a certain amount every year, even to start the training. And so the recruiting part is not difficult. You mentioned like millennials. I personally, this is my personal view, is, you know, millennials are just no more than fill in the blank generation something that we were. Now, when I say we, not we, because you guys are probably looking at me like, yeah, Gen Xer. But every, it's classic step back and just go, yeah, every generation does this. Like you know, my dad worshipped Satan because he listened to Elvis Presley, right? I mean, it's always happened, right? So I'm not hung up on millennials. They irritate me to no end, but at the same time, though, they bring a outlook to things that the dinosaurs like me, who actually control things, not getting there. You know, I am not getting there. And you can laugh. We can all laugh when we say, hey, have your 12-year-old show you how to set up your iPhone. Well, you know what? That 12-year-old becomes a 21-year-old. This is how he has lived, okay? Or he or she has lived, okay? And so when he comes into us, and you know, very core skill things we do and we will always do. But you know what? I'll tell you a story. We got a guy, 5-year-old, right? So we come in and we have things called JTACs. These are the Joint Terminal Attack Controller. These guys call aircraft in and drop bombs, right? And they do targeting. And there's a whole training program for that, right? There's a simulator for it. We have this awesome simulator right there in Imperial Beach. This 3D dome. You know, it's got images. It's like a F-18 kind of flight simulator, only this simulates for a guy on a battlefield, and he's calling CAS. And it's the way they get some of their calls. So here comes our 24-year-old, 25-year-old. He did like a couple of deployments. He's a JTAC, right? The guy's dropped a lot of bombs, got a lot of combat experience. And he's like, this JTAC simulator sucks. and it was like, this is a $5 million state-of-the-art JTAC simulator. He's like, really? Okay, I'm not exaggerating this. Okay, really? I just built on my iPad because he's a gamer, and he knows how to write code. He's got a in game design, and he goes, you know what? In 3 months, our goggles, some humma, this, that, and other things I didn't understand, and I can put this together, and we can have a full virtual reality JTAC trainer, and it'll cost nothing. I can build it myself. And I'm like, well, then do it, Mr. Millennial. Well, Petty Officer First Class Den just got the Chief of Naval Operations Innovation Award. He's down with General Thomas, our 4-star Special Operations Commander, showing how to use virtual reality for realistic training. And we now use VR goggles to create realistic environments where guys do JTAC. So I'm okay with it.
There is hope. There is hope. Matt, thank you so much for a fabulous presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you for your service.
Thanks. Thank you.